Welcome to ArtStarts Explores, our province of play. My name is Kay Slater, and I'm the gallery coordinator and preparator at ArtStarts in schools. Every month, we pick a new theme to explore together through art making and play. In these workshops, you can watch along anytime you have time to make, or listen, or just watch. We encourage young people, families, and creative people of all ages to join us every week on Saturdays at 11 a.m. as we release a new episode. These videos are for you, whether you want to join us on Saturday when they become available, or anytime you want to make. We're so glad you're watching. Have you missed a week? Check out artstarts.com/explores-online or any of our videos on YouTube or Facebook to check out an episode you've missed. Okay, let's explore together. Before we begin making, let's review the 3 rules of Explores. We've got rules in quotes here because they're less rules and more like guidelines or things that we like to have in mind before we start making together. First is respect. We practice respect for ourselves by checking in with ourselves every day before we start making. Maybe we didn't have a good night's sleep, or we're feeling really good today. Whatever it is, we want to take the time to check in with ourselves. We also practice respect by doing the same thing for each other. And if we're not making alone, we're making with other grown-ups, or other youth, or friends, or classmates. We want to practice respect by asking them how they're feeling as well, so we can be mindful of each other while we make together. Another way we practice respect is with our tools. That can be about putting them away when we're all finished, or using them safely. If somebody else is waiting for a turn to use a tool, we can use our words or our signs and share. We can respect each other by asking how long they'll need the tool so we can move on to something else, or if we need it now, we can let them know when we will be done and tell them we will pass them the tool when we're finished. We can also practice respect by acknowledging the land. So this space that you see here is my studio space. And I'm on the stolen, or unceded, territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations as an uninvited guest on these lands. One of the ways I practice respect is by acknowledging where I'm coming from and to be respectful of the lands, waters, and to the indigenous people who are here and who have been here since time immemorial while I have access to these lands. You can practice respect by finding out the territories and lands where you are watching and making from today, and by being the best guest you can and respecting the host nations, the lands, and waterways where you live. The second rule is that nothing is for keeps. I encourage you whenever possible to take things from the recycling bin. You can take paper that's already been drawn on, or has writing on the back, or is ripped, and then you don't have to feel worried about ripping it up yourself, or crumpling it, or just trying something out. It doesn't have to be good or perfect the first time, because it's not for keeps. And when we're all finished, I encourage you to take it apart. That helps really make it so that it isn't for keeps. Because if you know you're going to take it apart at the end, you don't have to make any finished thing. You can try all the things and ways of making. Our last rule is no expectations. If we're not expecting something to turn out good, or even to turn out bad, we're open to it going in a whole bunch of different ways. And that means that all respectful and creative ideas are good, regardless of what happens after we try something. If you already know how something is going to turn out, if you've done it before, we can be open to trying something completely new and practice surprise. And if it doesn't turn out, that's okay. It's not for keeps. These are the 3 rules that we like to keep in mind when we explore together every week. Okay, let's get making together. Hello and welcome to ArtStarts Explores. My name is Kay Slater and I'm the gallery coordinator and preparator at ArtStarts in Schools. This week we're going to continue exploring framing. In previous weeks we explored the concept of composition, which was when we look at what is inside of a frame and where we put it. The second week we explored what isn't in a frame. And so we were looking at things that might not make it into a picture, or when we decide to intentionally not have something in a picture, about how the person looking at it still is aware or still thinking about that thing simply by the fact that we took it out or that we omitted it. This week, what we're going to explore is depth and emphasis. And to do that, I've gathered a couple of tools at my making station. If you want to make along with me, that's great. Here are a couple of tools that you could use. Do you have any paper? I like to take paper from my recycling bin because everything that we're exploring today is not for keeps. And so when we're done making and exploring, I can put the paper that I pulled from the recycling bin back into the recycling bin. Do you have any mark making tools? A mark making tool is anything that makes a mark. And so for this week, I pulled out my colorful markers. I like to make with markers when I'm recording for Explorers because it's easier to see the markers because they have a high contrast when I'm filming. But you can use anything: crayons, pencils, pencil crayons, even paint. Whatever you have available to explore with is great for your mark making tool. A viewfinder or frame or camera. If you made with us in previous weeks, you might have already created a viewfinder. A viewfinder is basically just a frame that you can take with you when you're looking at the world so that you can find a view that you like, a scene that you like. I've made a couple of different versions of these, and they're just a piece of paper that I have folded in half, so any size, folded in half, and then I've cut out a rectangle out of the center of it and then unfolded it. So for these ones, these were just larger pieces of paper, right? So I cut it in half and then I cut my rectangle out and then I've got my viewfinder. For this one here, they're all caught together. For this one here, I cut it out of this piece. So that one came from that one. And then what I did was I folded it in half and I just ripped the rectangle out of the inside. So then I had this cool frame that had this kind of textured, ragged edge to the outside of it. And I ended up really liking how that looked. In fact, for this week, I think I'm going to keep this viewfinder and put my other ones to the side for our exploration. I also put frame or camera. So if you have permission, you could take a picture frame, and if it didn't have any glass or plexiglass, you could use that to look and to make inside of your picture frame, because we'd just be borrowing it for this Explore session. If you own a camera or you have permission to use a camera or a mobile device, when you're looking at the screen behind a camera, or if you're looking through your phone, that's a rectangle as well. And so as you move the rectangle or the camera around, you're able to use it like a viewfinder and find a view that you like. I encourage you to make at least one paper viewfinder. These are really great because you can fold them up and stick them in your pocket, and you always have them with you wherever you're going. And these can be really great to pull out when you're doing a walk of your neighborhood or going on a nature walk. Before you take a picture, you can pull out your viewfinder and you can look to see what kind of picture you'd want to take. The last thing that I have on my list are scissors. And if you've made with me before, you know that I love to rip paper. And so you can choose, or if you have a grown-up that you're making with who can use some sharper scissors, then that's great. But you don't have to have scissors to be able to rip or take apart any kind of paper, because I'll show you that you can just be ripping paper. So that's totally optional for you to have the scissors. Okay, so those are some of the things that I've gathered. You can be making with whatever you want as we explore. Okay, so depth and emphasis. Let's start with that word emphasis. And emphasis is kind of like drawing attention to something. So when you do an exclamation mark, we're saying something with emotion. So emphasis, we're being dramatic. We're putting emotion into what we're doing. Emphasis is also about making something more important than the other things around it. So I've got this word depth here that I put in all caps, but I want you to be paying attention to the word emphasis. And so I've put this exclamation mark, but maybe I could also go arrows, because I want you to really be paying attention to emphasis. I could put a frame around it. So the more things that I'm doing around this, the more I'm showing you that I want you to be paying attention to this word more than this word. This word has more importance. There's more emphasis on this word. When we think about crafting a picture or making an image, I'm going to put a piece of paper down here. Actually, I'm going to move my viewfinder to the side for a second and grab a marker. There we go. So when we're crafting a picture, any kind of picture, I'm going to start with a face. Right off the bat, the emphasis or your attention is drawn to this picture because there's nothing else on the page. There's nothing else for you to be paying attention to. And so by itself, I'm already making a point. I'm already drawing your eye to this one thing. If I really wanted to show you how important this happy face was to my image, simply by putting a frame around it, I'm telling you that it's so important. This picture, this idea, this image that I drew is so important that I'd be willing to put it in a picture frame and stick it on the wall or post it on a shelf. And so the act of putting a frame around a certain image gives it some emphasis. What about where I placed it on my page? I put it right in the center. There's nothing else to kind of distract you because of all this white space, but I've kind of implied that it's super important because it's right in the center of my page. Let's take another page. And if you drew a face, that's great. If you drew something else, that's cool too. But what we're going to do is we're going to rip out the first drawing or the first mark we made today. What changed? I took it out of one page and I put it in almost the exact same place on a new piece of paper. I'm still drawn to it in the center, but it's even more clear that I want you to be paying attention to this because now I have a different color of background. I layered this on top, and it's really clear it's on top, both because there's kind of shadows of the paper that I didn't really stick down, so it's kind of curling up around the outside, but also because it's one color that's sitting on top of another color. And so now I'm starting to explore this idea of depth and emphasis It's in front. It's in front and it's in the middle. So I really want you to pay attention to it. What happens if you move your figure or picture that you made around the page? What do you notice? I still think that that picture or that image that we drew is still very important. It's very clear that we want to be paying attention to it and that our eye is drawn to it because there's nothing else on the page. But something definitely feels different than when you have your image off to the side compared to when it's in the center, right? There's nothing around it to distract us. And that makes it forces it to be the thing that is the most important on the page. When we move our image to the side, all of a sudden there's more space, there's more color to be paying attention here. It's not broken up by anything. So while our eye still goes, okay, yep, there's something else to pay attention to, it's harder for us to spend all of our attention just on this one picture because there's all this space for our eye to be looking at, even if there's no new image over here. What if we were going to add multiple versions of our image? So you could draw the same thing multiple times, or you could draw a couple of different things. What we want to do is we want to add more information to our page to see what happens. Okay. If you wanted to use your scissors here, you absolutely can, but I just wanted to show you that you don't have to have scissors while also getting the chance to rip paper, because I do love to rip paper. Remember, you could make whatever picture or image you want. And it doesn't have to be the same. I just chose the same for mine. Okay. What about now? If we had to choose one image, one of these icons or figures here, which one is the most important? Which one does your eye go to first? I have a hard time picking one. My eye kind of goes to this one first because there's a little bit more paper, so the paper is a little bit bigger. But in general, my eyes keep bouncing back and forth between all of these eyes. Sorry, between all of these figures. They kind of all are the same. What if we were to move them around the page? Can you move your figures around the page and find a way to make one of the pictures or one of the images the most important, the thing that you can't ignore? Let's try it out. So I moved the figure, the face that I made, right back into the center again, and I got rid of some of the extra white paper around the other faces because I had noticed that by having more material on this piece, more space that was different, that helped me focus on that one figure. And then I put it back in the center again, moving all of these different pieces off to the side. So the center feels like a really important place when we're talking about depth. Layering on top or when we're talking about depth, so that's the order in which we look at things. Putting something on top is another way of us going or telling the story with our picture that this thing that's in the front is the most important. It makes sense when we line up, when we stand in a line for to buy ice cream, or waiting for the washroom, or we're going to go outside and our teachers ask us to stand in a line. There's a feeling that being first in the line is a privilege, is the best. That's not necessarily the case, but there's a feeling there. People kind of want to get there first. They're excited. They want to have the experience. And so there's an emphasis that we place, an importance that we place on being first in line. Same thing when we stack things in order. We don't usually call the first thing in a stack the least important. We usually put the most important thing up on a stack. But is there a way for us to still say that this is the most important when it's not the thing that is layered up on top? Can you think of a way that we can still make our face the most important part of this picture, even if it's sitting behind the yellow piece of paper? What do you think? Is that figure that I drew still the most important part of this image? We did a couple of different things by putting it like this. We kept it in the center, because we had acknowledged that being in the center was a place with all this extra space around here. It kind of leads our eye to the middle. We still have a little bit of that white space around it. And it's still the only image that we had on the page. What if we bring back some of our other figures? Is it still the most interesting or the most important thing? Is it the thing that your eye gets drawn to first? Do you notice that when I ripped out this center here, that it is a similar shape to our black frame? Even though this shape is behind everything else, by framing it in the rectangle, by putting it in the center, and by having all this space around it, even though there are other objects that are floating around, we still feel like this picture in the middle, this image, is the most important. Let's try something else with layering. What we're going to do is, we'll keep our figure here. And what I want you to do is I want you to try adding things all around your one image here, but don't cover it. Just keep adding things around the figure and see what happens. I'm going to turn my voice off for a second and create a couple of shapes. Okay. I'm going to add one more line. Here, and then over here. Okay. So I added a whole bunch of paper in front of my figure that I drew. What do you think? Is it still the most important or interesting part? Is it still where your eye gets drawn, where your eye wants to look when you're looking at this picture? The fact that it's white is still a big part. So using color to create emphasis in our drawings is an important one for sure. But even though it's behind everything else, I use these kind of tree shapes over here to create a frame within my frame. The trees are sitting around my circle. I made it into a sun by adding more lines because I wanted to keep adding more paper on top and see if I could still be paying attention to that circle. But by using the trees, by finding a space, a circle space, or just a tree-framed space where my sun could sit, our eye, even though it's not in the center anymore, right? So I could bring my frame over here, and so that it's in the center there. But by bringing it over here, I get the landscape down at the bottom. I get some of the trees over here, but I'm still using my surrounding, my landscape, other items within my picture to frame something that I want you to pay attention to before I even add my big black viewfinder frame. Let's do this one more time. This time I think I'm going to put it over to the side. Okay. You know what? I think I'm also going to redraw my face. I'm going to draw it in yellow because we already were exploring the idea that the color, the difference in color was part of the emphasis. I want to just explore depth now. So the act of layering things. There we go. So now I've got the yellow. So I've decided it's going to be down in the corner, and I'm going to build something around it. I think that's probably going to be enough. Okay. I think I want to move this one a little bit closer. There, and then that one like that. And then that one further away. Great, okay. Let's bring our viewfinder back in. What do you notice? I layered this piece of paper on top of another piece of paper. So it's on top of this piece of paper. And all of these pieces out on the outside are all layered on top of each other. What do you notice? I still think that this shape is the most important thing, even though we've brought it down into the side, because we've used these pieces of paper to still create these circle frames. In fact, just like before when I took my sticky and I drew arrows around it to emphasize I wanted you to pay attention to it, the repetition, the fact that I did the circles over and over again, so we have the circle here, and then we have this circle, and then this circle, and this circle. And even though we can't see a full circle, when we frame it, our brain kind of fills in the rest of the space to realize that this has been circled multiple times, and we really should be paying attention to it. What I wanted to do is I wanted to have this idea that even though I layered this piece on top, that all these circles that were kind of coming out from this figure here, they were creating some depth because they're pulsing out. They're from this place. They're moving, and so I'm creating kind of a texture and dimension in my picture by doing this repetition and continuing to frame the figure where I want you to pay attention to. One other cool thing happens when we create emphasis is that, especially when we've got multiple things to be paying attention to, is that your eye goes to one place first, but that doesn't mean that it ignores all the rest of the information. There's kind of a path or a sequence that happens. So just like the lineup of people that are waiting for ice cream, that second person in the line or that third person in line eventually gets to have ice cream. We don't just give ice cream to the first person in the line and then everybody else doesn't get served. They're not important anymore. There's a sequence that happens. So as soon as that first person is served, or as soon as our eye gets drawn to that first item in a picture, well, then our eye has to go to the next thing, the next most important thing. And so the next most important thing for me is that first circle around that first shape. Well, that second person has been served ice cream, or our eye has now taken in that circle. And this happens pretty fast with our eyes when we're looking at an image. But what's the next thing we notice? For me, it's this next circle. And when my eye is finished with that one, it goes to there. So it creates some depth of information simply for the fact that there are multiple things to be looking at. 1, 2, 3, 4, kind of 5. Let's see if I can shift this one over a little bit. There we go. And 5. Let's see if I can move some of that there. There we go. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so we're creating depth with information, not just depth by hiding something behind something else or layering paper on top of each other. If we were taking a picture and we wanted to have, so let's go back into the forest again. If you wanted to take a picture of somebody who was framed between 2 trees, you could have them stand in front of the 2 trees. But if there was a space between the 2 trees, you could also have them stand behind the 2 trees, and the trees become a frame around the person that you want to be taking the picture of. There are lots of ways that you can explore framing when you're doing your art making, and we've just explored a few. If this is your first time exploring the theme of framing with us, you can go back and check out our previous 2 explorations on our Facebook page, on our YouTube page, or on artstarts.com/explores-online. I'm going to leave my camera running for a little bit longer while I clean up because I like to do that every week. That's part of the 3 rules of Explores, respecting our space and respecting our tools. So I'm going to clean everything up so that I can get all ready to explore with you again next week. Thanks for exploring with me. See you soon.